Good morning. I know this might be tough to see, but can you guys, anybody know what this is? Not a phone. Well, it looks like the Zoolander phone. I know, but it's not. Anyway, I know it's small. It's an iPod. You're probably thinking, no, it's not, because this is so old. You know, it's cryptic. It's got, it got the dial on there, so I can dial in. No, that's not what that's for. But anyway, it's an iPod, and it's my iPod. And that's why it's ancient. I mean, there are so many iPods out here today that are so much more elaborate than this one. For those of you who aren't aware exactly what an iPod is, think of the Walkman back in the 80s. This replaced it pretty much. You can download music in here, music, videos, movies, books. Pretty handy little device. Pop your little earbuds in there. You don't have to walk around with those big headphone janks on, that weigh you down and give you a sore neck. They got little buds that pop in your ears. All kinds of accessories for these things. And I have to tell you, though, the most extravagant, by far, the most extravagant accessory I've seen for an iPod lately is something called the iDiamond. Anybody heard of it? Just by show of hands? Anyone? My wife. Shocking. Shocking. My wife has heard of that. I know I'm in trouble now. The iDiamond it's just a case. It's just an iPod case and earbuds, matching earbuds, made by a jeweler in Norway. All right? Now here's the deal with it. It's 18 karat gold. It's white and pink gold. And the case, just the case, is embedded with 312 diamonds. Yeah. Now the earbuds, they matched. They're 18 karat gold, white and pink gold also, and they only have 118 diamonds embedded in them. And the cost? $45,000. Just for a case and some earbuds. Now if you want to save a little bit of cash, you can just get the earbuds. They'll set you back about $7,000. Yeah. Now, who in the world would buy this? I mean, honestly, I don't have a clue. Anybody in here? And I'm looking at my wife, making sure her hand stays down, so as I can do the whole thing. Oh, yeah, I have no idea who would buy this thing. Honestly, that's really expensive. That's a lot of money just for a toy, pretty much. I mean, I can have Savannah. I can go buy something at the dollar store, and Savannah can bedazzle it, and it'll look the same. Well, it might not be the same, but it'll look pretty close. But I have no idea who in the world will buy that thing, but I can tell you this, somebody will buy it. Somebody made it, somebody will buy it. There's going to be a person somewhere who's going to find a way to get the money they need to go out and buy that thing. And that's just the way we are. That's our human nature, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest, if I want a new vehicle, if I want to get a new truck, I'm going to have to figure out a way. If I want it bad enough, I will figure out a way to get the down payment and to make sure I can make those monthly payments. If I want a new house, I will make sure I find a way to get that down payment, again, the down payment, and make sure I can cover the mortgage payments. If I want to, this is crazy, if I want to fly across the oceans, which I don't, and take my wife on a vacation to Hawaii, I will find a way. I will find a way to get that money to get it done. That's just the way we are. We want something bad enough. We find a way to get it done. We find a way to cover it. And the same is true with our stewardship with God. As a preacher, there are just a few messages that people don't want to hear. There are a few topics that Christians and non-Christians alike don't want to hear about. They don't want to hear about sin. Don't tell us about sin. I think it's because we all deal with sin. We all have moments in our life where we're battling and struggling with sin and temptation, and so nobody wants to hear about it. They just say, we know it, just don't tell me about it. And sometimes we really like that thing that we're doing over here that we shouldn't be doing. So we don't want to hear that that's bad. We don't want to hear that God is not happy with us. So then they don't want to hear about sin. But another topic that Christians and non-Christians alike don't want to hear about is hell. Nobody wants to hear about hell. I just don't know if it's something that we think is just a place that doesn't exist, or what. It's kind of like the message last week where I was saying that, some Christians believe that God promises us ice cream and lollipops. And some just want to believe that. No, I just want that ice cream and lollipops. Don't tell me there's a place over here that's a place of torment. Because it might not be that person that is feeling like, hey, I'm headed there. But they might be thinking about family members. And it might be pretty disturbing. So I don't want to hear about hell. Don't tell me about a place. Not that place. But, by far, the most, I can't say hate, but the single most message that Christians and non-Christians alike don't want to hear about in church is giving. And it's sad. And I can tell you that I only have one message each year that'll be on giving, okay? Now, you were here for the Tracy jar. Now, that, like I said, that went way beyond giving money. That went way beyond giving our tithes and offerings. It went into our entire lives of giving. But this morning, specifically, I want to talk about giving, and I want to look at it in a financial sense, because it's very important to God. Now, the text this morning is Malachi chapter 3, and it's verses 8 through 11. And God makes it very clear in verse 8 how he feels. He says this, "Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings." And so God says, here's the deal. You're robbing me. And then the Israelites say, okay, really? How so? And he says, in your tithes and offerings. They're stealing from God. You know, there was a little boy named Billy, and he was given 2 quarters on Sunday morning. All right, and every Sunday morning he received 2 quarters. One was to give in his Sunday school class as his offering, as his tithe, but the other quarter was for him to take to the ice cream shop to get an ice cream cone. And so he's out Sunday morning and he's waiting for Mom, and he's out by the car and he's flipping one of his quarters and he's catching it and he's having a great time until the quarter hits his thumb, and then it falls to the ground and it rolls down across the street, and it goes into a storm drain and down in the sewer. It's gone forever. And he's standing there, he's sad, he's all rejected, feeling and dejected and everything, and he's hurt, he's tore up, he's broken, he doesn't know what to do. He looks in the sky and he says, "Sorry about your money, God." That's kind of what we do. I mean, there's some humor to that, but that's kind of what we do. That's exactly what the Israelites were doing. The Israelites in Malachi's day were doing the same exact thing. They come under some financial difficulties, and they lost their quarter. And they didn't know what to do other than stand there and look to the sky and say, "I'm sorry about your money, God." And God calls them out. Calls them to the task. Because in the Old Testament, okay, the Old Covenant, that tithe was commanded. It was required. And so he tries to get their attention by asking them a simple question. Can a mere mortal, can just a man rob God? You know, and they respond, they're angry. They respond with, "What are you talking about? How have we robbed you?" You know, God says, "When your tithes and offerings." Now they're upset. They're upset because God's not blessing them. And because God's not blessing them, they're not giving to God. And because they're not giving to God, God's not blessing them. And it just keeps going over and over again. Now, I want you to pause for a moment, because that's Old Testament. Okay, that's Old Testament right there. I want you to flash forward with me just for a moment. Let's go to the New Testament. Okay? Acts chapter 4. Now, you don't need to turn there. We're just going to talk about it for a few moments. Acts chapter 4, we see 2 guys, Peter and John. And they're out and they're preaching and they're teaching about Jesus. And the Sanhedrin, they're not happy about it. And so they come up and they tell them, "You guys got to stop. You need to knock it off. No more. Don't want to hear a word about this Jesus guy. None at all." And they refuse. I mean, they basically say, "No, that's not going to happen." And in fact, in Acts chapter 4, verse 19, they say, "Judge for yourselves whether it's right in God's sight." I don't have this one. I do have it. I wasn't sure I had it. Okay, never mind. Shut up. Acts 4:19. "Judge for yourselves whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than God, for we cannot help speaking about what we've seen and what we've heard." Basically, they're saying, you know what, you do what you're going to do. That's okay. That's whatever floats your boat, buddy. But for us, we're going to obey God. We are putting God up here as a top priority in our lives. And because they did that, because they were such exemplary leaders in doing that, the early church put God at a top priority in their lives as well. And the same should be true for the church today. But unfortunately, that's not what we typically see in the church. There was a man who gave an explanation of what his giving should mean. He said this: when I give nothing, I'm casting a vote for the church to be closed. Think about that. It says, when I give less than last year, two things have happened. One of two things have happened. I've either experienced a decrease in my income, or my priorities have drastically changed. He says, when I give less than 1/10 of my income, I am doing less than what was required of the poorest Jew. He says, when I give grudgingly, I find no joy in my giving, and I'm a disappointment to the Lord. Now, there's some truth in that, because, 2 Corinthians 9:7 says the Lord loves a cheerful giver, and so we're to give cheerfully. Now again, we were over here in New Testament. Now let's come back over here again to the Old Testament. Okay, let's get back to our story in Malachi, because they weren't getting it. They didn't put God up here as a top priority, as a high priority in their lives. They weren't giving to God. God wasn't blessing them, and because He wasn't blessing them, they weren't giving to God. It just keeps going over and over again. But it gets worse. It progresses. Because God says in Malachi 3:9, He says this to the Israelites: you are under a curse, your whole nation, because you're robbing me. Now, in a nutshell, stinginess brought a curse upon them. See, obedience brought blessings, but disobedience brought a curse. I think there's so many times when we blame God for things that we bring on ourselves. I experienced that in counseling all the time. Okay? Now, first of all, when you come to me and we're sitting in my office and we're having some sort of a counseling session, of however you want to say that, whatever you say in there stays in there. It's kind of like Vegas, okay? That's terrible. I think my office says Las Vegas. But what you say in there stays in there. It really does. I don't share it with anybody. I don't share it with the staff. I don't share it with the elders. I don't take it home and share it with my kids or my wife. I don't even share it with my dog. He doesn't understand me anyways. But I don't share it at all. It stays in there 100%. And I can tell you that there's going to be a point where I'm going to ask you one single question. Because I do it in all of my counseling settings. Now, if you've been with me for a while and I haven't asked you the question, it's coming, okay? Just be prepared. It's coming. There's somewhere in my brain is this question that's coming out, and I'm going to eventually ask you. Now, it doesn't matter if I'm meeting with an individual, or it's marriage counseling, or even if it's family counseling. I eventually will ask a simple question. I'll ask what your giving looks like. Now, I don't want to know percentages. I don't want to know how much money. I just want to simply get you thinking along those lines of, I'm not really giving much of anything, or I'm giving plenty. I want you to be able to recognize where your giving is at, because I can tell you, we go through the same things the Israelites were going through. God's not blessing us, and we don't give to God, and because we're not giving to God, He's not blessing us, and then we figure He's not blessing us, so I'm not going to give to Him. And we go through this vicious cycle, but we can break that just by simply changing that and giving to God. Now, let me make something very clear. This is Old Testament we're talking about. Old covenant, old agreement, okay? But it might be a shocker to some of you, but we live over here in the New Testament. So all of you, you're all Old Testament. You probably have to move over this way to join us in the New Testament over here. No, don't. Just you're good. Stay there. But seriously, we're here in the New Testament. We live in this New Testament, this new covenant, this new agreement. And so we're not under that curse for not bringing our tithe. Now, a tithe means a tenth. Okay, that's literally what it means. It's a tenth. It's a tenth of our income. Pretty simple example. If you bring home $500 a week, 10% is $50. If you bring home $1,000 a week, wow, you got an awesome job, and maybe you need a helper. 10% is $100. You keep $900. I don't know about you, but that's a deal. God could have said 50%. God could have said, I want 80%. He said 10%. And it seems like we struggle with that 10%. We don't have any problem blowing that 90% wherever. Even if we don't have bills to pay, it just seems to disappear. But boy, we struggle with that 10%, don't we? But we're not under that curse. But, I wholeheartedly, completely believe that when we give our 10%, that we are under the same blessings that God offers in Malachi. Now, you're probably wondering, how in the world can I say that? Well, it's because of something I read. Something I read in Hebrews chapter 6, and we're not going to turn there again, we're just going to talk about it. It's very clear though. Hebrews chapter 6 tells the story of Abraham and Lot. Now, you can actually read the story in Genesis. All right, the book of Genesis gives a full account of this story. But basically, what's going on here is there are 4 kings that get together and they join forces and they go around and they pretty much just kick butt and take names along the way, and they just seem to be unstoppable. And they capture Lot. Now, Lot is Abraham's nephew. Abraham hears about it, and he gets 300 men from his household, and he goes off to fight these guys and to get Lot back. And so he does. He gets out there, and he attacks the army, he routes them in a different direction, and he gets Lot, and it's pretty cool because they got some, spoils of war, a little bit of gold and silver and some animals and things, and so they're heading back home with all their awesome goodies and trinkets and everything, and as they're headed home, they pass a city called Salem. And when they pass Salem, they meet this man named Melchizedek. And he's a high priest of God. Now, we don't know anything about this guy. All we know is he was there, and then he wasn't there. And that is seriously all we know about him. There's no way to track back to a beginning and an ending of Melchizedek. It's just this one instance. There is. He's a high priest of God. And when Abraham sees him, he gives him a tenth of everything. Actually, let's read the text first before we continue much further. Hebrews 6, starting in verse 19. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner, Jesus, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now, there's some important things the Hebrew writer wants you to know. Okay? His whole thesis for the entire book of Hebrews is Jesus is greater than anyone. Okay? And so there's no angel that's equal to him. There's no man that's equal to him. Moses was a big shot in the minds of the Jews, but he wasn't even equal to Jesus. Okay? The high priest wasn't equal to Jesus. The Levitical priesthood wasn't even equal to Jesus. There's no one like him. And he is in that priesthood forever in the order of Melchizedek. And so this is a big deal. We see this priest of God, and Abraham gives him 10% of everything. Now, it's important because he did this long before the law and long before it was required. Now, is it still required today? No. But I believe it's desired still today. It pleased God then. I believe it still pleases him today. Now, we're going to get to it in just a moment. We're going to get to this amazing blessing that God promises. But back in the Middle East, we got to be careful with stealing from God. That's what the Israelites were doing. And it didn't end well for them. It's not going to end well for us. In the Middle East, in the Old Testament times, it was very common for a sacrifice to be taken from the altar. Okay? A burnt offering. Now, a burnt offering was an animal of some sort. It could be the whole animal. It could be just a part. So let's just pretend that there's a nice lamb chop being offered, okay? And it would be burned. And it was, the whole deal was the smell would reach the heavens and it would be a pleasing aroma to the Lord, okay? And so if you can imagine this leg of lamb here burning, all right? It was very common for eagles to swoop down in and to grab the offering and fly away with it. And they would take it to their nest to feed their young. Now, the bad thing, for the eagle that is it would often have coals that were still stuck on the animal somewhere, burning coals. And so when it would drop it in their nest, we're talking an eagle's nest is a pretty big size nest. Drop it into that thing, it would catch on fire. And it would burn up their entire home, obviously, and it would kill their babies. So there's a good lesson from that. Stealing from God doesn't end well. Taking from God. That's really what the Israelites were doing. They were robbing God. They were taking something that belonged to Him, and they were keeping it for themselves, or putting it somewhere else. And because of that, we already went through it, God pronounces this big curse upon the nation, but He knows that they can change. He knows that there's some hope, and so He gives them a challenge. And this is what He challenges them in Malachi 3:10. God says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing there will not be room enough to store it. So God offers a solution to what's going on. He says, okay, I see what the problem is over here. You're not giving to me. Let me just give you this as a challenge. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. And if you do, wait until you see what's going to happen. I'm going to bless you so much, you won't even be able to hold it. You won't even be able to contain all of it. Now simply, just as a question, is there anybody that wants to be blessed by God? I mean, just by show of hands, you want God's blessing in your lives? I mean, yeah, I think we all do. It's kind of a simple question there, a simple answer to the question. This is what God says to do. He says, look, if you bring the whole tithe in here, trust me in this, test me in this, is really, that's where it's at. There's a great deal of trust. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. So there's some trust. You gotta trust God. When you're coming in and you're giving your offering, it's not going to me. I don't give it. It goes here. Actually, you're giving it to God. Trust in Him. Trust Him that He is going to meet your needs. He's going to supply your needs. Bring the whole tithe. And He says, I will bless you so much, you won't even be able to contain it. As a church, we need that blessing. As a people, we need that blessing. As a nation, we need that blessing. We know John 3:16, that God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. And so we see that because He loved, He gave. And out of love, He gave. That was His motivation. His motivation to give was love. And that should be the same for us. Our motivation to give should be our love for God. That is why we should give. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning, this opportunity to gather here